The grocery store was loud in the way it always was on Saturday afternoons. Shopping carts rattling, scanners beeping, children whining for candy their parents pretended not to hear. Aisha Thompson barely noticed the noise. Her attention was fixed on the small hand wrapped tightly around her fingers. "Mommy, can we get the cereal with the dinosaur?" her son Malik asked, pointing excitedly at a bright box on the shelf. Aisha smiled, the kind of tired but genuine smile that came from working 2 jobs and still trying to make ordinary moments feel special. "We'll see, baby. Let's check the price first." Malik nodded seriously, as if price checking were the most important responsibility in the world. He was 6 years old, curious, polite, and endlessly talkative. He had Aisha's eyes and his father's dimpled grin. To her, there was nothing in the world more obvious than the fact that he was her child. To everyone else, apparently, it wasn't so obvious. As they walked toward the checkout lanes, Aisha felt it first as a sensation rather than a thought. That familiar tightening in her chest, the sense of being watched. She had learned not to ignore it. She glanced up and caught the eyes of a white woman standing near the end of the aisle. The woman looked away too quickly, then looked back again, openly this time. Her gaze flicked from Aisha's face to Malik's lighter skin, then back again, lingering with suspicion rather than curiosity. Aisha looked forward and kept walking. She told herself not to react. She told herself it was nothing. She had told herself that many times before. At the register, Malik began chatting with the cashier, a young college-aged guy who smiled politely but seemed distracted. Aisha paid, thanked him, and turned to leave. That was when she heard the voice behind her. "Excuse me, Mom?" Aisha stopped. Slowly, she turned around. The same woman from the aisle stood there now, lips pressed into a thin line, phone already in her hand as if she'd rehearsed this moment. Is that child with you?" Aisha felt the blood rush to her ears. "Yes," she said calmly. "That's my son." The woman frowned. "He doesn't really look like you." Aisha stared at her, disbelief flashing into something sharper. "Excuse me?" "I just mean," the woman continued, lowering her voice but not enough, "I've seen a lot of stories on the news. Kids being taken. You can never be too careful." Malik tightened his grip on Aisha's hand. "Mom," he whispered. Aisha squeezed his fingers reassuringly. "It's okay, baby." She looked back at the woman. "You're out of line. Please step away from us." But the woman didn't move. Instead, she raised her phone slightly. "I've already called the police. If everything's fine, then you won't mind waiting." The word police hit the air like a dropped plate. Aisha's heart began to pound, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she knew how quickly situations like this could spiral. She had seen the videos. She had lived the stories. Innocence did not guarantee safety. "This is harassment," Aisha said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You don't get to question my motherhood because of how I look." A small crowd began to form, people pretending not to stare while staring anyway. Whispers followed. "Is that her kid? They don't look alike. Better safe than sorry." The store manager approached, hands raised in false calm. "What seems to be the problem here?" Before Aisha could speak, the woman jumped in. "I believe this child has been kidnapped. She can't prove he's hers." Aisha felt something crack, not loudly, but deeply. "I don't have to prove anything to a stranger in a grocery store," she said. "My son is scared. Please let us leave." But Malik was already crying now, confused and frightened. "Mum, why are they mad?" Aisha knelt down and pulled him close, resting her forehead against his. "They're not mad at you, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy's right here." The sound of sirens grew louder outside. Every muscle in Aisha's body went rigid. When the police officers entered the store, conversation died instantly. 2 white officers, both tall, both expressionless. The woman pointed immediately. "That's them." One officer approached Aisha. "Mom, we received a call about a possible child abduction." Aisha stood slowly, keeping Malik behind her but holding him close. "This is my son. His name is Malik Thompson. I am his mother." "Do you have proof?" the officer asked. Aisha reached into her purse with shaking hands, pulling out her phone, scrolling frantically for photos. Birthday parties, hospital bracelets, school pictures. She held the screen up. The officer glanced briefly, unimpressed. "That's not official documentation." Aisha's voice broke for the first time. "You can't be serious. You think I carry my son's birth certificate to buy groceries?" The officer didn't respond. The second officer looked down at Malik. "What's your mum's name, kid?" Malik sniffed. "Aisha," he said softly. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "We're going to need to take you both to the station until we can sort this out," the first officer said. Aisha felt the floor tilt beneath her. "This is insane," she whispered. "You're traumatizing my child based on a stranger's assumption." The woman who had started it all stood to the side, arms crossed, looking satisfied rather than concerned. As the officers gently but firmly guided Aisha and Malik toward the exit, Aisha locked eyes with the woman. "You're wrong," Aisha said quietly, "and one day you'll know it." Outside, the patrol car waited. Aisha buckled Malik into the back seat herself, hands trembling, heart breaking at the sound of his sobs. As the door closed, she looked up at the grey sky and forced herself to breathe. She didn't know how long this would take, she didn't know how much damage it would do, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The truth was on her side, even if no one else was yet. The accusations spread faster than the truth ever could. By the time Aisha reached the security office, the airport felt different. Colder, sharper, as if every polished surface had turned into a mirror reflecting suspicion back at her. The guards walked on either side of her, not touching, but close enough to remind her she was no longer seen as a mother, only as a problem. Her son, Malik, clutched her hand tightly. His small fingers trembled. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Did I do something bad?" Aisha's heart broke quietly, the way it had learned to do over years of swallowing injustice whole. "No, baby," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong. Mommy's right here." Inside the security office, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A white supervisor sat behind a desk, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Aisha with a mixture of impatience and certainty, as if the story was already finished in his head. "This won't take long if you cooperate," he said. Cooperate, as though love itself required permission. They separated Malik from her. That was when fear turned into fire. "No," Aisha said firmly, stepping forward. "You will not take my child away from me." The supervisor sighed, glancing at the guards. "Ma'am, we just need to verify—" "You're verifying me," she interrupted, her voice steady but shaking underneath. "Not him." Malik began to cry. The sound echoed in the small room, raw and unmistakably human. Aisha reached for him, pulling him close, rocking him the way she had when he was a baby, back when the world still felt safe inside her arms. A female officer entered, holding a tablet. "We checked the flight manifest," she said. "The child was listed under a different last name." Aisha exhaled slowly. "Because his father and I were married when he was born. We divorced. I kept my maiden name. He kept his father's." Silence. The supervisor frowned. "Why didn't you explain that earlier?" Aisha stared at him, stunned. "I wasn't asked." The words hung there, heavy and undeniable. Still, doubt lingered in the room like a stain no explanation could fully erase. Someone suggested calling Child Protective Services. Another mentioned standard protocol. Each phrase chipped away at her dignity, reducing years of motherhood to paperwork and suspicion. Through the glass wall, travellers passed by, unaware that a woman's life was unravelling behind frosted windows. Aisha caught her reflection, eyes tired, shoulders tense, jaw set in quiet defiance. She thought of every time she'd been followed in a store, every time she'd been asked to prove she belonged, every moment she'd been invisible, until suddenly she wasn't. After nearly an hour, they finally allowed her to call her mother, then her lawyer, then, begrudgingly, Malik's father. When the call ended, the supervisor leaned back in his chair. "Well," he said, tone shifting slightly, "we're arranging a DNA test, just to be absolutely sure." Aisha felt the weight of centuries press down on her chest. "Absolutely sure," she repeated softly. Malik looked up at her, eyes red, face confused but trusting. She kissed his forehead, her lips lingering there as if she could seal him against the world. "Whatever you need," she said, meeting the supervisor's eyes, "because I know who my child is." And for the first time since this nightmare began, something shifted. Not in the room, but in her. This wasn't just about getting on a plane anymore. This was about being believed. The courthouse hallways smelled of disinfectant and old paper, a sterile calm that did nothing to quiet the storm inside Mariah. She sat on a wooden bench with her son asleep against her shoulder, his small fingers curled into the fabric of her jacket as if the world might try to pull him away again. Every few minutes she felt his chest rise and fall, a soft reminder of why she could not afford to break down now. Across the hall, the man who had called the police stood with his lawyer, laughing too loudly. He looked comfortable, confident, like someone who had never been questioned a day in his life. He hadn't looked at Mariah once since they entered the building. To him, this was an inconvenience. To her, it was everything. When the courtroom doors opened, the bailiff called her name with a flat voice. Mariah stood slowly, steadying her legs before walking inside. The judge sat high above them, expression unreadable, flipping through papers as if this were just another file in a long day. Mariah felt small beneath that gaze, but she lifted her chin anyway. The prosecutor began by repeating the accusation. A woman matching Mariah's description had been seen taking a child from a playground. The word hung in the air like poison. Kidnapping. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Mariah's lawyer objected to the phrasing, but the damage was already done. She felt eyes on her back, curious, suspicious, some almost eager. Then the defense requested the DNA results. The room went quiet. The judge adjusted his glasses as the lab technician took the stand, a thin man with tired eyes who spoke carefully, precisely. He explained the process, the samples taken from Mariah and from the child, the controls, the verification steps. Mariah barely breathed as he spoke. Each sentence felt like a step closer to air after drowning. "The results show," the technician said, pausing to look at the report, "a 99.9998% probability that the defendant is the biological mother of the child." For a moment, no one reacted. It was as if the words needed time to land. Then the courtroom shifted. The judge straightened. The prosecutor blinked, clearly unprepared. The murmurs returned, louder now, different in tone. Mariah felt something crack open in her chest. Not relief yet, not fully, but the first hint of it. The man who had accused her stood abruptly, his face draining of colour. "That doesn't mean," he began, but the judge cut him off sharply, reminding him to remain silent. Mariah's lawyer stood, voice calm but firm, and spoke about assumptions, about how easily suspicion had replaced basic decency. She talked about how quickly a black mother had been seen as a threat instead of a parent. With every word, Mariah felt the weight begin to lift, even as tears burned behind her eyes. When the judge dismissed the charges, the sound of the gavel echoed like a door slamming shut on a nightmare. Mariah hugged her son tightly, burying her face in his hair as her knees nearly gave out. She was free. He was hers. The truth had spoken. As she left the courtroom, people avoided her gaze. Some looked ashamed. Others looked confused, as if the world had failed to match the story they had already written in their heads. Mariah didn't stop for any of them. She walked straight ahead, her son awake now, smiling up at her without knowing how close he had come to being taken from her by nothing more than a stranger's certainty. Outside, the sun felt warmer than it had all day. Mariah closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She knew the accusation would never fully disappear, that whispers and memories would linger. But she also knew something else now. She had survived being doubted, judged, and nearly erased, and she had walked out holding the truth in her arms. The room was silent when the DNA technician finally entered. Every head turned. The air felt heavy, like no one dared to breathe. The black mother sat frozen, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the envelope in the technician's hands. Across the room, the officers who had accused her stood stiffly, their earlier confidence gone. They had spoken so loudly before, so certainly. The technician cleared his throat and handed the sealed report to the lead investigator. He opened it slowly, scanning the page once, then again. His face changed, colour drained from it. "This confirms," he said, his voice lower now, careful, "a 99.999% maternal match." A ripple passed through the room. "That is her child." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the mother let out a sound she had been holding in for days, something between a sob and a breath. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the chair to stay upright. The child, who had been sitting with a social worker, ran toward her, calling her name. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around her child, holding on as if the world might try to take them apart again. Around them, reality crashed in. The accusations, the handcuffs, the stares, the whispers, the hours she spent in a cold room while strangers questioned her motherhood. The investigator swallowed hard. "Ma'am," he said, no longer meeting her eyes, "you're free to go." Free. The word felt too small for what had been taken from her. Later, in the hallway, one of the officers who had first stopped her tried to speak. "We were just doing our job," he muttered. She looked at him then, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that made him look away. "No," she said calmly, "you were doing your assumptions." By the time she stepped outside with her child's hand in hers, the sun was setting. Reporters had already gathered, questions flew, cameras flashed, but she didn't stop. She walked forward, head high, her child safe beside her. That night, the story spread. Not as a crime, but as an injustice exposed. And for the first time since it began, she slept knowing the truth had finally spoken louder than prejudice.